The Wimbledon men's singles final of 1975. This was not black power. This was grace, elegance. This was brain power, the creation of a strategy that might frustrate the prevailing order of the day. Frustrate and overcome. Arthur Ashe, Wimbledon champion.
I know what it's like to be stepped on, so I know what it's like also to see some black hero do well in the face of adversity.
I have an opportunity to play. I have an opportunity to be the best that I can be because of him, because of what he went through.
He wanted to help the world. It wasn't only about perfecting his slice backhand.
Out on court, there was a struggle going on.
Could I just... Sorry, I'm busy, right?
You're born of a free will. You can play or you cannot play.
A power struggle in tennis and in life, in America and across the world. And Arthur Ashe was in the middle of it.
He ended up infuriating one side or the other, and in most instances, both sides.
A black man in a very white world, playing the game and winning in an age of protest.
He didn't stretch that arm out there and bow his head. That wasn't Arthur.
The champion with a softly spoken defiance in a time of conflict.
Even though I failed at times, I think I was a better person ultimately because of the time that I did spend with Arthur.
Arthur Ashe, defiant to his end.
He was still rocking, he was still going for it. Come on, give the guy a break.
I have known, of course, that I have AIDS since September 1988.
One struggle he could not win.
You never heard him say, you know, why me?
Oh, yeah.
Richmond, Virginia, capital of the Southern Confederacy in the American Civil War, and still segregated in post-Second World War America. Black kids could play tennis, and skinny little Arthur Ashe surely did, on these courts 20 paces from the family home.
I kind of knew of him even before I met him. I played tennis for Hampton, Virginia. We had a really good team, and the #1 player was a guy named Billy Nielsen. And every summer, Arthur would come down from Richmond to play against him. And he said, that little Ashe kid is going to kick your ass every time you play because he's sensational. I said, we'll see about that. And turns out he was right.
Being good at tennis was one thing. Being black and good was another. Black kids could play, but the tennis establishment was white.
I was refused permission to enter the Richmond City tournament at Byrd Park, which is a white park. And I remember talking to Mr. Sam Woods, who sort of was Mr. Tennis in Richmond. And he was very kind and accommodating, and he really had a look of disappointment in his face. I remember looking, even at age 12, that if left up to me, I would let you play, but the law is the law, and you cannot play. So I drive away from that with my coach, knowing that the only reason I could not play was because I was black.
Then you have the segregation law. We have segregation on our buses. The whites are supposed to ride in the front and the Negroes in the rear.
It was very much an evident piece of our life, seeing colored-only signs for water fountains, for restrooms. Of course, the schools were segregated. We had our own playgrounds. But in a sense, because we had our own playgrounds, we have an Arthur Ashe.
There was a ruthlessness about that period as well. I mean, there were lynchings, there were beatings, there were killings, there were shootings. All these things happened. And families, parents try to be very protective of their kids, so they instilled in them the notion not to fight back, to be passive, to take it. In fact, that's one of the things that helped Arthur and those who followed him to succeed.
Arthur Ashe Jr., like I, and a bunch of my cousins, were taught by our fathers. We were taught to do the right thing for the right reason, no matter what the cost, to look past that which is in your face and think about the future.
On Monument Avenue in Richmond, the statues of the Confederate generals face one way. Arthur faces in the opposite direction. He's the one looking to the future, perhaps.
What I do know of Arthur Ashe, he was, of course, a great tennis player, great humanitarian, and I remember the unveiling of the statue here on Monument Avenue. It was a wonderful day, great day. There was some protesting against the placement of the statue because I don't know if you're very familiar with this street here, but it's mainly Civil War heroes, and hence the name, Monument Avenue. So I thought it was a wonderful tribute. Arthur Ashe, great guy, loved him.
Tennis was known as a sissy sport. You know, we related to basketball and football, you know, team sports. Arthur said to me, I want to be the Jackie Robinson of tennis. Jackie Robinson played college baseball at UCLA. He was one of the first African Americans to receive scholarship money. I want to break the color barrier in tennis. One day, I hope to be able to win our national tournament, Wimbledon, as the first Black American, or Negro, he would say. I never understood this at this time. You know, I was too young to understand it. But this is how far he had taken the dreams of his life.
Arthur would play a tournament in Wheeling, West Virginia, at a place called Ogilvy Park. And he could play there because it was a public park. I would play, then I had a younger brother and he would play. So this was back when Arthur was 12, 13, 14. And that's one of the ways I got to know Arthur very well. My dad just would drive us home, and we never said why we didn't stop, but we would drive the 6, 8, 10 hours nonstop, because if we had stopped, Arthur probably couldn't have stayed in the same hotel or motel that we were in. It would have been a very embarrassing, unpleasant moment for Arthur.
You know, at the time, not only him, but Althea Gibson, I remember reading how she had to sleep in a car because they wouldn't let her sleep in the hotel. And yeah, a lot of people would have quit. I probably would have quit. I wouldn't have wanted to deal with all that negativity just because my skin is darker than someone else's.
Until 1950, black tennis players in America, male or female, were barred from entering national championships. Althea Gibson, who would go on to win the US Open and Wimbledon, was the player to change all that.
And that's it. Game, set, and match to Miss Gibson.
The cause of integration was led off court by Robert Walter Johnson, a doctor from Lynchburg, Virginia, who became known as the godfather of black American tennis.
He was able to get the powers at the high school level to allow blacks to play in integrated events.
Dr. Johnson became Arthur's mentor, coaching him in Lynchburg, watching him win all across the country.
Dr. Johnson, I want to introduce you to our Rona TV cameras, and tell us, you've got some other boys here in Lynchburg too, haven't you?
Yes, I have a couple of boys here today that won the men's doubles championship yesterday.
Arthur, what's the occasion? Explain.
We're here today to honor Dr. Johnson, my second teacher, my second most important teacher. He did a lot for me. I've been with him since I was 10 years old, and that makes 12 years now, and I haven't stopped progressing yet, so he must have something inside.
He was successful everywhere, except at home in Richmond.
Even though he proved to be the best at that level, they wouldn't recognize him as a great player in his own hometown.
But he could play for his country in the Davis Cup, as he did in 1963, and won a tennis scholarship to the University of California in Los Angeles. At UCLA, he did something unusual for a tennis scholar. He joined the university's Reserve Officers Training Corps.
When you were coming out of college in those days, you know, the Vietnam was starting up, and they were drafting people. And he would have been drafted and then just gone in as a private first class. Well, he had a college degree and a college education, and he wanted to be an officer.
He graduated in 1966. With a degree in business administration, he seemed a conventional figure in rousing times.
Black men and white men will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual, free at last, free at last, thank God Almighty, we are free at last.
Arthur's contribution was less outspoken.
The pastor of the Church of Redeemer at the time was quite a tennis enthusiast. So he decided that he was going to invite Arthur Ashe to be one of our fellowship forum speakers. He wasn't a real muscular guy. I remember him being kind of tall and lanky. I remember some of the girls, they got back in the corner and I heard them say, "Oh, you know, he's so shy."
When it came to women's rights, when it came to being outspoken on behalf of working and lower class African Americans, he said, hey, a lot of poverty in the black community is laziness, people not applying themselves. So in some instances, not only was he not a radical or a militant, he was not even a liberal, but this had a certain appeal to many of the audiences that he spoke to.
America's involvement in the Vietnam War was escalating. The university officer reservist now joined the regular army. He served at West Point, the U.S. military academy, as a data processor. He didn't serve in the theater of war, and so he missed this.
The former imperial city of Hue was overrun by the communists during the Tet Offensive. Some of the bitterest fighting in the Vietnam War broke out.
Arthur didn't need to experience combat. I had a God thought. I mean, it had to come from God, because there's absolutely no way it could come from Johnnie. I decided to stay another tour. I surprised Daddy by coming home a month early. And I said to Daddy, I said, I don't want Arthur to go to Vietnam.
The rule was that two brothers could not serve at the same time. Opposition to the war was growing. America's involvement was being questioned at every turn.
Do you ever wonder how you and other Marines here ever got into this fix with...
In '68, all hell broke loose in America. And Martin Luther King was assassinated, then Bobby Kennedy was assassinated. You really thought that all your leaders were going to be assassinated.
Institutional culture was in turmoil, and athletes were a key part of that.
Mr. Muhammad Ali has just refused to be inducted into the United States Armed Forces.
Before the games, of course, there was a lot of talk about black power demonstrations, and this is when it happened.
When I approached Arthur, I wanted him to come out and make a statement in support of the Olympic Project for Human Rights, and his response was, Harry, I support what you guys are trying to do. I understand what you're trying to do, but that's not my way. In other words, I can't come out and make a statement in that regard. I said, well, the only thing I can figure is that he's an Uncle Tom.
To be an Uncle Tom, to be excessively subservient, a black man slavish to white authority.
I remember we went to a meeting in Atlanta, Georgia. Jesse Jackson was there. And from the back of the room, he yelled up and he said, hey, Brother Ashe, you got to get a lot more outspoken. And Arthur turned and said, Jesse, I don't do it with my mouth. I do it with my racket.
The racket was working well. Tennis offered a certain shelter. He was still in the army, playing tournaments as an amateur. He was offered a professional contract, but was advised that if he won more, he could make more. In 1968, he won his first Grand Slam title, the US Open.
And here's to you, Mrs. Robinson. Jesus loves you more than you will know.
As a result of him winning that, he is now a champion, and people listen to champions. Motivating factor.
He was Arthur Ashe. There was this backdrop of moderateness that made people unfearful in terms of listening to him. Whereas somebody like me, 6'8", 285 pounds, bald, wearing shades, I walk in and say good morning, and it's like I'd issued a terrorist threat. I mean, everybody is.
It's not always the loudest person that leads the best. Like, let's say with Harry Edwards, wanting him to be more like Harry. No, Arthur needs to be Arthur. Whatever his authentic self is, that's what's important.
When it was over, I shed a tear or two because my brother and what I knew it would mean to him as a person, being able to do the things that he wanted to do, make the contributions that he wanted to make.
Arthur wasn't able to get prize money at the time because he wasn't a professional. It was $14,000 to the winner, and Tom Ocker got that money, and Arthur was an amateur. I met Arthur the first time playing Davis Cup in 1968. I just graduated from college. Arthur had been out for a few years. Donald Dell was the captain of the Davis Cup team. And that's when Arthur and I got to know each other pretty well because we traveled together and played Davis Cup. And especially in 1968, we played 5 matches, culminating in Adelaide, Australia, when we won the Davis Cup.
See what he does with this. Bang. Ashe into the net. He wrongs, puts Ray Ruffles. Arthur Ashe has beaten Ray Ruffles. Great victory to America. They now lead 2 rubbers to love in the 1968 Davis Cup Challenge round from Memorial Drive in Adelaide.
Certainly in Davis Cup competition, you know, he was very proud to be an American.
And so, through tennis, he found himself heading at last for the war.
Arthur did come to Vietnam as well during the time I was there. And he came to Saigon, and I was in the Delta in a place called Canto, and I flew up to make sure I saw him. He went there as a member of the Davis Cup team.
You know, we visited hospitals, we played exhibitions, we went to dinners, and it was really kind of a goodwill tour. We went down there as tennis players, ambassadors. Well, we wanted to do our part, and certainly as tennis players, a lot of us were fairly well known, and we'd been to many cities that the soldiers have been to. You know, we'd say, "Where are you from?" They'd say, "Philadelphia," and they said, you could just say, "That's a great city," because that's where they want to be if they're sitting in the hospital with missing a leg or an arm or whatever their injury was. Arthur was actually with a soldier, and he started going to convulsions in the brain unit, and they got us out of there, got him out of there, and that soldier didn't make it. It was tough duty.
See, in Arthur and Stan, I used to always say, these are great people who happen to be good players, but they were better people than they were players, in my mind.
You know, I think he's the kind of person who would want to do whatever he can besides play tennis. I mean, he's just not, he was eclectic. I mean, he wasn't just pursuing one goal. I mean, what else can I do to help make a difference?
Arthur didn't do free at last, but he did want tennis for all.
I actually started in 1969. Arthur, along with Sherry Snyder, and then Charlie Passerell, they had this idea that tennis should be introduced to kids in the same way that basketball is introduced, which means you get to have fun. The first day you come out, you choose up teams, you get to compete. Then if you want to take lessons later on, that's fine, but it's not a requirement. Its initial emphasis was on inner city, underserved communities, lacking in after-school programs. And of course, having Arthur as the founder and the spokesman was a very attractive thing. And tennis was really popular then.
It was a generous initiative, unthreatening. Could it make a difference? It could.
I was involved in USTA. I think it was in the NJTL for a bit, and it was something Arthur started, so I definitely knew that he started, and I was really happy to play it. And it motivated me. Reading stories about how Arthur wasn't able to play when he was 12 motivated me because of what he went through, because of what he did. I have an opportunity to play. I have an opportunity to be the best that I can be because of him.
We are teaching kids to play tennis and to excel at tennis, not for tennis' sake, but as a means to an end to earn a college scholarship. And he would love that.
In 1970, he won his second Grand Slam title, the Australian Open, and was in the US team that won the Davis Cup again. Now was the moment to turn professional. He entered a tennis world in upheaval, of rival player bodies, of professionals straining for their rights against national federations.
In the immediate future, I see a lot of head knocking. I'm really worried about the 50 or so players who lose in the first, second, and third round, and the fourth round, but who want to play tennis for a living.
The game was changing. Prize money was coming in. There was nobody representing the players as a group. Everybody was the federations were all together. Davis Cup were together. It was a big fight, and the best way to have a voice was to be represented.
There would be a reckoning. The summer of 1973 and the draw for the Wimbledon men's singles. But how many of the world's top players would turn up? Arthur was on the board of the newly formed Association of Tennis Professionals, the Players' Union.
Under these amateur rules that we had come up on, players had to be in good standing with their country. And Niki Pilic elected not to play Davis Cup, and so he wasn't in good standing with the Yugoslavian Tennis Association. And we felt that he should be in the draw. And Wimbledon said, no, he's not in good standing. We're not going to let him in.
The ATP took on the tennis establishment. 81 of the top men's players and 13 of the 16 seeds threatened to boycott Wimbledon.
This afternoon, it was not so much tennis, but tennis politics that seemed to matter. Obviously, we'll have to wait for tonight's meeting before a final decision.
Well, there wasn't a vote taken, but there weren't any dissenting votes in the room.
What would the Wimbledon authorities have to do to make you play?
The Wimbledon authorities cannot make us play. In fact, no tournament in the world, no tennis event can make anyone play.
I was looking forward to defending my title, but we felt it was important, so all the leaders and all the top players didn't play that year.
And Stan Smith only won one Wimbledon. That's the type of character that like Stan and Arthur had. Something that at the time I wasn't really aware of, and nor did I respect as much as I do now.
Our fight is not with Wimbledon. Let's make that clear. It just so happens that the Wimbledon fortnight coincides with Niki Pilic's ban.
He wants to be involved in deciding things for tennis, I think. Probably if he was not a tennis player, he would be a politician, I think, Arthur.
Have you informed the other members of the Players Association that you are going to play?
Well, not everybody, but I tell some of them, and it's really, I'm feel sorry that I cannot stay with the player, but it's the way I like this.
There were others like Ilie Nastase who did not join the boycott.
Could I just...
Sorry, I'm busy, right?
Britain's Roger Taylor was one. Jimmy Connors also opted to play. Connors belonged to a rival players' organisation, World Team Tennis. Arthur and Jimmy Connors would soon clash again.
I remember in the early 70s going over to play a tournament in Johannesburg, South Africa, during the apartheid. But one of the reasons I went over was because Arthur Ashe was going over.
It seemed a jarring connection. After 3 years of being denied a visa, here was Arthur Ashe in apartheid South Africa.
I mean, no African American ever went over there because of apartheid. I mean, they were just rebelling against it. It was like, it's just something you didn't do.
On my left, Arthur Ashe.
One of the press conferences earlier on, Arthur had said, angrily about South Africa. He said, I wish they'd drop a hydrogen bomb on South Africa. He couldn't imagine apartheid, which was much worse than being black in America. He wanted to understand it. It's all about curiosity.
Settle down, please. Jimmy Connors won the toss and has elected to receive.
When he up and went, and then provided the explanation that, well, I wanted to see for myself. Well, that's the equivalent of sticking your head in a blast furnace after everybody had said, hey, that's some heat that you don't want. Those who thought that he should just go and play and keep his mouth shut and don't make an issue of his race or of playing in South Africa blasted him. Then there were those who blasted him for going over there in the first place from the left. So Arthur oftentimes ended up alienating, infuriating one side or the other, and in most instances, both sides.
Connors, 22 jaar oud. Een van die tennismiljonairs. En dat is die einde van die wedstrijd. Jimmy Connors.
In 2 consecutive South African Open finals, he lost to Jimmy Connors. What could possibly have been gained by coming here?
It was important to Arthur for black South Africans to be able to see what can be done, because there were people who had been stripped of possibilities. He was a living example of the possibilities. There again, using tennis as a vehicle to contribute to the world.
He probably, he didn't put 100% into his tennis, and he probably could have won a lot more titles, very much like a Billie Jean King could have, but I put them in the same category because you know, Arthur had just so much going on in his mind. He wanted to help the world. It wasn't only about perfecting his slice backhand.
That's fair. We had parallel careers. There's no question. Of all the players that played in our era, he and I were people that had a cause, not just on the court, but off the court.
I'd just like to say that as a foreigner, someone who takes a great deal of interest in the place, I think that repeated trips by the sportsmen, including us tennis players and other teams of the world, can go a long way toward normalizing relations between South Africa and the rest of the world. Thank you very much.
He would later say it wasn't his finest moment. Arthur couldn't beat Jimmy Connors on court, and he might have to face him in court too. Connors of World Team Tennis was suing the ATP, of which Arthur was president. Connors had been barred from the 1974 French Open. He also refused to play Davis Cup tennis. Jimmy and Arthur had serious issues.
Why do you whisper green grass? Why tell the trees what ain't so?
The 1975 Wimbledon Championships. The men's singles final. Arthur Ashe against Jimmy Connors. To win, Arthur would have to touch a new peak of serious application, wouldn't he?
We were at the Westbury Hotel, a block off the Dorchester. There was a beautiful, big Playboy Club. And Arthur liked it. I said, Arthur, why do you want to go to the Playboy Club? And he said, because I can go in there, I can get in the back, they have very good food, and then I'll play a little blackjack, and I'll go home. Fine. So Arthur and I and Charlie Passerelle, we went to the Playboy Club, did exactly what he said, and we talked about the match, and we talked about how he should play him and what he should do.
Well, I'm looking forward to today, something I've been preparing for, in a sense, all my life, but before the match starts, I'm not as nervous as I thought I was going to be, but that really doesn't bother me too much. I think it should be a pretty good match. I think he'll probably have his hands full.
It was mind games to him. You know, he wasn't the best athlete, he wasn't the best mover, he had a great serve, but how he just approached that final in such a serene way that I think it even caught Jimmy by surprise. There was a very strange atmosphere that day.
Comparatively light Arthur Ashe, just over 11 stone, which is not very much for a man of 6'1".
He also wanted to send that message a little bit to Connors. He's walking around in his USA jacket, which Connors didn't have because he wasn't on the team. You know, that was what Arthur was wearing during Wimbledon all the time. I mean, he was on the Davis Cup team. It said USA on it. He was very proud of it. Why not? No, we had planned it. We wanted to send a message.
The first really vivid memory I had of Arthur was he had a cool, super cool look, the big fro, and I mean, I thought it was amazing.
I don't know what the odds were at the bookies, but I would think that match, he was as big an underdog as you could almost be in a Wimbledon final.
I'd asked him a couple of times, Arthur, why is it so hard for you to beat Jimmy Connors? And he was saying, you know, his return of serve, his court coverage, and he has the ability to get inside your head with the way he plays and what have you. And I said to Arthur, please, nobody gets into your head. Hang in there, you can do this. And he says, I know it. I can do it. I'm going to do it.
Arthur Ashe, looking at the linesman, thought it was out. The crowd thought so.
Quiet, ladies and gentlemen, please.
He was lucky in the way that people disliked probably Connors so much, in a way, because he was so brash and in your face and good, which, you know, people didn't like.
The linesman has deferred his call. The ball was out. Game to Ashe.
He was just so in the moment. He actually put a towel over his head
on the changeovers to completely block out what was going on so he could go through the match. You could just see how important it was, but how emotional it was. At the same time, he was so calm, cool as a cucumber.
And the press is going crazy. They're saying he's meditating. What's he thinking about? Must be a poem or, you know, just the things we had talked about, refreshing his memory.
Jimmy is reading the letter from his mother and his grandmother, and he's tucked that letter inside his sock for luck. It's Ashe serving, 2 breaks of serve, 4-1 first set.
He thought his way through the match, knowing that if he could slice the ball with a serve and get Jimmy off the court, reaching with his backhand, that he could open up the court and go to the opposite side. And he played sort of soft shots and varied his game, which was effective against Jimmy.
And turned out to be very cerebral, very brilliant at the time to sort of give Connor sort of off-speed pitches and different looks and all this type of attack instead of the way Arthur usually played, which he was sort of known as like a pretty big hitter.
Arthur was the kind of guy, intellectually, he could implement what we talked about, which is very unusual.
But it wasn't his style at all. And so it was a mesmerizing match to see him go through a totally different game plan for Jimmy than he'd done the rest of his career, pretty much.
Oh, I say, that's a really crude shot.
Jimmy got frustrated because he wasn't expecting it either, which obviously made it even more effective.
Yes.
$30-15.
I'm trying, for Christ's sake. Well, I've never heard that before on the centre court.
I think he was one of the first people that you suddenly realised that sport wasn't just about how physically good you are. It's just how you approach it in your mind. How do you get yourself in that mindset to be a champion? And he did it on the world's biggest stage.
A great tennis player's mind turned inside out, upside down. To be as he was, he had to be a winner. He stood now on the brink of taking over as the world number 1.
$40-15.
So 2 championship points for Arthur Ashe. That's it! And he's done it. He really has done it.
He didn't jump up and down and run all over the court and throw rackets and all that. That wasn't Arthur. He just did this to acknowledge, yep, I did it, and that was the end of it, the emotion.
The press says it's the Black Panthers salute. It had nothing to do with the Black Panthers.
I don't know. But that's what, that's what he felt like doing. And I think he felt, again, an alliance. I mean, when you overcome the kinds of odds that black folks have had to overcome in so many arenas, it's just something that you feel very strongly.
Jimmy and I were not an item then, and to be honest with you, I was on an airplane going home. But I was shocked when I heard about it because a pilot came on. It was that important that a pilot came on and made the announcement, Arthur Ashe just won Wimbledon, beating Jimmy Connors, and I was flabbergasted.
So what it is to see a picture of a man who's achieved a dream after all these years. 8 times he's tried at Wimbledon. A man of vision, man of character, and here he is at last, the Wimbledon champion.
You didn't give him too much pace, and you mixed it up, you lobbed well, and you played with such perfect tactical acumen in those first 2 sets. You had it under control, didn't you?
You must know what you're looking at, Peter.
It was a popular win, I think, from the player's point of view, because Jimmy had kind of put him against the world. It wasn't like he was a bad guy necessarily, but the players really would have liked to seen him be part of the whole development of the game.
Jimmy, some guys, when they lose, they don't like sitting in that chair too much, so thanks for coming.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Don't worry, it's okay.
What did Connor say to you when you beat him at the end?
Didn't say anything.
Did it surprise you?
No, I didn't say anything either.
Why not?
Well, what can I say? I just shook his hand and walked off.
can't win them all, I guess. I was up against a very hot Arthur Ashe, and he played like it. He played like it was the finals of Wimbledon. Unfortunately, maybe I let him get away with it a little bit too much.
Well, having grown up in a segregated environment in the South, I know what it's like to be stepped on. So I know what it's like also to see some black hero do well, in the face of adversity.
What always surprised me was I probably had 100 people over the next couple of years say, you know what I was doing when Arthur won Wimbledon? I can remember exactly when he won Wimbledon, it was sort of a moment in time that was very special to lots of people in the sports world.
One last question, Arthur. How's your form for the first dance at the ball tonight with the lady champion?
I've never danced with Billie Jean, but I look forward to it.
When we were dancing, and I looked at him and I said, Arthur, we both have afros. I was teasing him. I said, but yours is for real? And he started laughing. But I wore an afro, and not one media person picked up on it. And I thought it was perfect for us both, because we fought so hard off the court for causes. I thought, thank you, God, that we had this opportunity, because I think it was meant to be. That he and I, born the same year, we both had our Wimbledon title at the same time, and that we could dance together with our afros.
What about possessions? So are you not materialistic in any way?
Right now, I have very few possessions, but not because I don't want them or wouldn't want to use them, but because there's no real need for them, logically. I don't have a car because I'm never in one place long enough.
What about clothes?
Clothes? No. Wouldn't have too many clothes because you're only... Tennis players never travel first class internationally. You're only allowed 20 kilos.
It's really a case of have racket, will travel.
Yes, I only have 5 rackets.
Talented, articulate, charming, successful, wealthy, and single until yesterday. Yesterday, Arthur Ashe lost his bachelorhood. The 33-year-old Ashe married 25-year-old Jean Marie Matusami, a graphic artist at NBC and a freelance photographer.
When they later adopted a daughter, they called her Camera, a name from Jeannie's chosen profession, not Arthur's.
What's the best advice you've gotten?
Advice we've gotten? Not to do this again.
I feel pretty good. Ambassador Young also told me that my job is going to be a lot tougher than his. So.
He always said he'd never marry a feminist. He's married this very docile woman. And then when I met her and she started saying Ash, she'd call him Ash, like I need to talk to you. She was so sweet. I started laughing at Arthur. Is this what you thought you were marrying? He goes, no, it isn't. So they matched up really well, both very intelligent.
Now you're known to be a non-temperamental type of player. What's your feeling about the people who create tantrums in tennis? Do you think that they're harming the image of the sport?
Well, I think we need a few eccentrics, shall I say. We don't need 200 of them.
How's your old friend Nastase?
Well, it's, you would believe, but Nastase is one of my best friends. But as I said...
Well, that's good.
The attraction of opposites. The unflappable Arthur and the sometimes overwrought Ilie Nastase.
Sometimes I just bug him and, give him, hard time. In Paris, I remember I put him a little mouse in his locker. I hide his racket sometimes, but he took it, he knew it was me. He always, when something happened to him, he said, oh, it's nasty, I know it's nasty. Come here, give him a racket. I said, no. He started to laugh, He always laughing, turn around when he laughs. I don't see him. In 75, I think, in the Masters, I think it was in Stockholm, the same thing, I bug him so much in the tennis court. He took his racket, he said, I cannot take you anymore.
This sense of containment, underlined, reinforced from a young age.
He was raised by a no-nonsense father. He wanted his son to behave, to treat people respectfully. Nastase, misbehaved, and Arthur kind of treated him like a little kid, come on.
Nastase, you are already won.
Suddenly he took his racket and left. Obviously, everybody was upset with me. He said, never happened to Arthur Ashe to default in a tennis match like that. And I felt sorry because I think I went too far, and that's why I agree and I give the match to him. If it was somebody else, I wouldn't do that. But we are very good friends. Arthur downplayed any sort of pressure. He downplayed all the exposure on him. He felt very strongly about, players behaving on the court.
If we made an error during a match, we were to smile. I'm not kidding you. Of course, there was this inner rage that was always there, but I would have loved to have been a jerk just once on the court.
Were there hidden dangers in not letting off steam? Unreleased stress? In 1979, at a tournament in Kitzbühel, Austria, his playing career came to a sudden halt.
Yes, I mean, to be, 36 and having a heart attack, especially someone who's in the shape he was in, just didn't seem to fit.
Well, I knew that his father had had 4 or 5 heart attacks before he died, so I knew he had a weak heart, but yes, it was a real shock, of course.
Yes, he was lean and mean, but the stress of life, being the first, took its toll in its own way.
He would have 2 heart operations. He could no longer play, but accepted the non-playing captaincy of the US Davis Cup team, managing the stresses and strains of others, and of one player in particular.
There were some things that I did in Davis Cup as well as individually that I'm not proud of, and I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I wouldn't have changed a thing. But when you get involved in something you really care about, the angst that you're feeling or pressure, or at least you're putting on yourself, things happen that perhaps you wish didn't.
McEnroe wanted them to hurry up and get back into action, but Ashe ordered McEnroe to stop arguing with them and get back to his place.
Johnny Mac sort of mellowed later in life, but he was a very difficult young player. But Arthur handled him. He knew how to reach him.
I had a lot of respect for Arthur. I sort of, to some degree, blew it off, maybe in the heat of the moment. It wasn't anything personal. It was just my own looniness or insanity. And it was sort of like, look, you know what you're getting in a way.
And he was having to deal with John McEnroe and Jimmy Connors, and it was different for him. It was a big challenge for him, and I think there were times that I'm sure that he found it very difficult, but he got through it.
Arthur's team won the Davis Cup in successive years, in 1981 and 82.
Even though I failed at times, I think I was a better person ultimately because of the amount of time that I did spend with Arthur, even though I didn't maybe know it at the time. I look back and I think there was a nice way that he tried to mold me.
And from the captain's chair into the commentary box.
With Connors going out on court number 1, Chrissy almost going out on court number 1, Martina not favored to win here this year. The old guys are on their way out. The old girls, too.
And Arthur and I know how it feels, believe me. I thought he was pretty good. He would laugh, but he wasn't effervescent. He's not outwardly with his body language enthusiastic. And I use my body a lot. He didn't, so I used to laugh because of the contrast.
And he wrote 3 volumes of A Hard Road to Glory, A History of the African American Athlete, and his autobiography, Days of Grace. Brother Ashe was making an impact now.
Arthur wrote a wonderful editorial in the New York Times. It was basically a message to the parents of young black athletes and said, get your kids out of the gym and into the library. I worked with him on researching that, and we figured out the number of athletes in the United States that make their living in playing sports. It was about 2,000 at the time. And then you say, how many lawyers are there? And how many doctors are there? And your statistical chance of making a living and becoming a success were much greater in the library than on the sports field. That was his sensible philosophy.
I was privileged to be mayor of New York City. In 1990, when Nelson Mandela was released from prison, and he came first to the United States, first came to New York, first place he visited outside of South Africa when he was released from prison. And among the people he wanted to meet was Arthur Ashe. And I like to believe that because of them and others, I was successful in attaining the mayorship of New York City. And we say often, everybody stands on somebody's shoulders. Arthur is a very special human being. An architect or an engineer or a lawyer who is black will do better because Arthur Ashe existed.
But now that very existence was threatened again. After the heart problems came something else.
He fainted a couple times, and we thought he had a brain tumor. We sent him into New York Hospital. They did all these tests on me. I said, God, it's great. You don't have a brain tumor. It's fantastic. I was all excited, you know. And she said, Jeannie said, well, you know, but Arthur has something he wants to tell you. And the doctor was there, and me and my wife, and just four of us. And Arthur said, yes, the doctors tell me, Donald, that I have AIDS. That's what they say, but I don't believe it. I don't have AIDS. He got AIDS in the second operation in the Harlem hospital from tainted blood. But he didn't have HIV positive. He had full-blown AIDS in the fourth stage when they found it.
There was a very quiet conspiracy among people who knew Arthur that there was a possibility. And because of the respect for Arthur and the respect for his privacy, because they knew he was a very private person, nobody said anything.
The HBO family, I call us, even though we worked at television, but I considered us a family. We knew for 4 years that he had HIV/AIDS, and he never knew we knew until that moment when he was outed. And I told him, I said, Arthur, do you realize that we've known at HBO for 4 years that you have AIDS? He said, no way. I said, way? I said, yes, we've known, but we knew your privacy was so important to you. It was terrible not being able to talk to him about it for 4 years and knowing he was struggling.
The story was about to break. It was just that Arthur didn't know his secret was about to be revealed.
He was covering for HBO during this time, so I used to see him all the time at Wimbledon particularly. And I always felt that it seemed to have something that he might want to tell me, but he didn't. And so we didn't talk about it. And shortly afterwards, that's when I got the call from someone and indicated that this was the case. Now, journalists, you get calls from everybody, and you might get crank calls, and et cetera. This was not a crank call. This was someone I knew, and I knew it was important, and I did make the decision that this is something that I have to follow.
Arthur himself said he understood why, as journalists, once we had this account, that we felt obligated to check it. And actually, I don't know that I could ever say he was pleased that we came to him, but I think he understood and appreciated that the first place we went was to him.
And then he said, why did you come here? It was the first time that I'd seen him as angry as he was. He was really angry with me. And I said, Arthur, because it's my job, and I didn't want anyone else doing my job.
Arthur gave me a telephone call and said, tomorrow I'm going to have to tell the world I have AIDS. It's a day I dreaded, and of course it's a day he dreaded, not necessarily because of him, but because of Jeannie and camera.
I have known since the time of my brain operation in September 1988 that I have AIDS. It was transmitted through a blood transfusion after one of my open heart bypass operations. In all likelihood, the second operation in 1983.
What he felt was that as a result of this, people would treat him like a leper, that they wouldn't want to touch him, that they wouldn't want to be around him. And he was concerned about how they would also react to his wife and his kid.
Just as I am sure everyone in this room has some personal matter that he or she would like to keep private, so did we. There was certainly no compelling medical or physical necessity to go public with my medical condition.
You know, he was not in a good place. I talked to him 5 minutes before that conference. I was on the phone with him 5 minutes before you see him speaking. He said, I've really been ratted out, and I really am upset. And I said, I'm so sorry, that you're not able to do it in your own terms.
And only now, in the face of something in his life that he could not control, did the unflappable Arthur falter.
Camera already knows just read that paragraph for me.
Camera already knows.
He really was upset. I mean, he couldn't even finish speaking. In that press conference, Jeannie had to get up and finish his words that he had written. So that was a very difficult a time for him.
I was having a tough time, but he gave me a phone call. He said, just want to check on you to make sure you're doing okay, make sure that you're not still concerned about this. And about a day or two after that, Jeannie called, and she said, we love you. They were concerned about me, and obviously he's the one who's dying here. But that was just, again, a different man, rare.
And so began the last chapter. Arthur summoned what remained of his strength, and in his own way, quietly, but with that steely determination that had made him the very best on the tennis court, he carried on the fight. His fight, to the end.
Almost 3 or 4 months after he made the announcement, he formed the Arthur Ashe Foundation for the Defeat of AIDS. And during that time, he raised $5 to $10 million. People were contributing all over. And the most important thing, I think, is that he helped people with AIDS to deal with the rejection, to let them know that he has it too, and you don't have to go into a shell. He was pretty active in doing that.
I asked Arthur, what's the most difficult thing for you? He said, Billy, because I didn't know if it was the AIDS or if it was or being of color. I didn't know. And he said, the toughest thing for me is being a black man. Because every time I step out of the apartment, because he lived in New York, I know that maybe the taxi's going to pass me up when I need a ride because of my color. He said every day he feels discrimination because of his color. And he said, I feel that has been my most difficult journey, even more difficult than the HIV/AIDS journey.
It suddenly just hit me like a ton of bricks how much tougher it was for him than it was for me. And I remember when it came out that he had AIDS, I'm like, God, did he get a short end of the stick, man.
I got a book in the mail from him, signed by him. And it was a book on women athletes. And he said, to Chris Evert, you have started such a great thing with encouraging young girls to become women athletes and to not be afraid to be strong and tough at the same time. Like a letter. And it was in the book. And I was like, why is he doing this? And then later on, like a month or two later, he passed away. So, I think he kind of sensed that he wanted to say his goodbyes.
He said, okay, this is my situation. I'm going to deal with it. I'm going to try to, get through it, do whatever I can. His last day, he was out there, he was arrested one time supporting the civil rights movement, marching in Washington, D.C.
He was still rocking. He was still going for it. Come on, give the guy a break. Now Arthur just worked up to this last moment that he possibly physically could.
His friends would say, look, Arthur, don't do this. It's not good for your health. I mean, he was taking 20 or 30 pills a day, still fighting, and still with the hope that he would be able to get through this. And you never heard him say, why me?
Hello, and I am sorry I was unable to attend in person the Connecticut Forum on AIDS, but I did want to make this tape to bring a few messages to you as you are assembled and talk about this vital subject.
Arthur would have been the forerunner to Obama. I really do mean that. He would have run for office. And I've said this in writing and speeches. And I mean, America, we lost a great person in Arthur. He was special. And America lost a great person.
Again, thanks for your patience. I am sorry I could not be there in person, but I hope this tape and my message in a small way makes up for my lack of being there in person. Thank you and good luck.
I'm going to read an item off of the Associated Press wire. At 3:15 today, Arthur Ashe died of pneumonia and other complications from his battle with AIDS. And I'm very sorry for Arthur and his family.
To see Arthur Ashe Stadium at the U.S. Open, it seems like his, the way people feel about it, you know, his legacy will always be preserved now.
That's something that I will never forget, was the opportunity to meet Arthur Ashe and to kind of know his legacy. Those moments that can just make someone go left or right, and that's why to this day, when I have an opportunity to see kids and do clinics for kids, I do it, because you never know how that can impact, even if it just impacts one person.
You would definitely see progress, but he would definitely be saying we should be better than this. Specifically in America, we have an African-American president, yet racism seems to have gotten worse the last 10 years.
I think all of the players have a lot of respect for what he did away from the court, what he did for, you know, for tennis as well. It's something that, you know, a lot of the players will try to emulate. Whether they get anywhere near to what he's done is a different story, but they can try.
Arthur would view it as the pinnacle of respect for the way he lived his life, that somebody could use his life as an example. How many of us can we say that we've been exposed to, that we can use their life as an example to teach somebody else? There ain't many. Okay? There ain't many. Without him realizing it, deep down, that's what Arthur Ashe's life was about.
Ahead of this year's Wimbledon, go online at bbc.co.uk/iwonder, where former champion Pat Cash has a guide to what makes the perfect tennis serve.